Cassius was only 12 years old when he ran through the streets of Louisville screaming that he was going to catch that thief. His red bicycle, his greatest joy, had disappeared from the sidewalk. He looked around, his fists clenched, unable to accept that someone had taken what little he had. Desperate, he entered a police station and met a police officer who would change his life. "If you want to catch that thief, boy, you'd better learn to fight first," said Joe Martin, who was also an amateur boxing coach in addition to being a police officer. Cassius didn't hesitate. It wasn't just anger that drove him that day. It was the sense of injustice that would never leave him. That moment, simple and brutal, was the spark that ignited the legend on in his early training sessions. Cassius moved awkwardly, but possessed unusual speed for someone his age. Joe noticed something different. This skinny boy didn't fear getting hit, but he hated losing. Each missed shot was followed by firm statements. "I'm going to be the best," he repeated like a mantra. His confidence wasn't just childish. It was a belief that shaped his body and mind. In the modest gymnasium, amid worn sandbags and the smell of sweat, an invisible force was born. The conviction that he would be greater than all the people who laughed at him at school. Greater than poverty, greater than the prejudice that suffocated his community. The first amateur fights came quickly. Cassius entered the ring smiling, moving as if dancing, and left his opponents confused. He didn't have refined technique, but he had something even more powerful. He believed he was already a champion. Each victory reinforced the prophecy himself had made aloud. "I'm the fastest. I'm the greatest." Many laughed. Few took him seriously, but he didn't need anyone's approval. He just needed to hear his own voice. At 15, while other boys still played in the streets, he trained twice a day. He ran in the rain, jumped rope until his arms burned, and never stopped repeating victory phrases in front of the mirror. Joe Martin would say, "Cassius, you have talent, but talent isn't enough." The boy would respond without hesitation, "I'm not talented, I'm destined." It was this unshakable faith that kept him going through the loneliness of endless training, and the looks that told him he was dreaming too big. When he stepped into the ring for youth competitions, his style began to stand out. He was too fast to catch. He talked during fights, taunted his opponents, and, even as a teenager, he already knew that words were as powerful as punches. He would win, raise his arms, and shout, "I told you I would win." The audience was torn between laughing and applauding. Cassius, however, already saw himself as something more than just an amateur boxer. The stolen bicycle episode not only led him to boxing, but also taught him that the world could take everything away in seconds. To survive, he needed to fight. With more than muscle, he needed to fight with his mind. This was what made each training session an act of resistance, each victory a response to the fate that seemed intent on crushing him. Cassius didn't see small rings. He saw packed arenas. He didn't see local opponents. He saw world champions. And when he closed his eyes before sleeping, he imagined hearing applause that hadn't yet existed. It was this mixture of anger, pride, and faith that formed the beginning of the myth. Louisville witnessed the birth of a boy who refused to be ordinary. He didn't know it yet, but that red bicycle had been the price of destiny. The thief disappeared, but left a legacy, the awakening of a flame that would set the world ablaze. And that's why I believe it's not victories that shape a champion, but losses that force them to fight. Cassius's stolen bike wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a journey for an unknown boy who would soon win Olympic gold and become the symbol of an era. How that young man, still ignored outside his city, would walk to Rome and change his life by winning the Olympic Games. Rome, 1960. A young man of just 18 walked through the tunnel that led to the Olympic ring. His heart was racing, but the smile on his face left no doubt. Cassius Clay was unafraid. He had told himself 1,000 times that he would win, and now, before the lights of sport's biggest stage, he believed it more than ever. The crowd's applause sounded distant, drowned out by the noise of his own thoughts. Each step was a declaration. I was born for this moment. Cassius was not the favorite. Many saw him as just another overconfident American kid, but he knew he hadn't gotten this far by accident. Years of hard training in Louisville had shaped not only his body but also his mindset. In his first fight, his speed surprised his opponent. His movements were so fast they resembled a dance, a choreography of dodges and precise strikes. The audience began to realize there was something different about this kid. With each fight, his confidence turned into a spectacle. He talked in the ring, smiled, and provoked something almost no other athlete did. In the semifinals, when many expected his boldness to end, he displayed the coolness of a veteran. He dodged with his head held high, responded with quick combinations, and when his hand was raised as the winner, Cassius raised his arm with such certainty that it seemed he already anticipated the gold medal. He wasn't just fighting his opponent, he was fighting against low expectations, prejudice, and disbelief. The final was the climax. His stronger, more experienced opponent entered determined to silence the loud-mouthed young man. Cassius, however, was undaunted. His eyes shone with the same fire that had been burning since the day he lost his bicycle. The rounds were intense, a clash of styles, but at the final bell there was no doubt, victory was his. Cassius Clay was an Olympic champion. The boy from Louisville now had the world at his feet. As he stood on the podium, the gold medal hanging around his neck, Cassius gazed at the American flag being raised. But in his mind, it wasn't just a sporting triumph. It was proof that his voice didn't lie. Everything he'd said about himself was coming true. And in that moment, before millions of spectators, not just a champion, but a legend was born. Gold medal wasn't just a sporting achievement. It represented the victory of a young black man who dared to believe when no one else did. It represented the power of self-belief. Cassius proved that destiny isn't luck, it's conviction. The boy who cried over a stolen bicycle now smiled before the world, carrying on his shoulders the weight of a promise. He wouldn't just be an Olympic champion, he would be the greatest of all time. And that's why I believe true glory is not in the gold medal, but in the fire that never goes out inside those who dare to believe in themselves. Before we move on to the next chapter, I want to ask you, the viewer, something. If this story has touched you, if this beginning of Cassius Clay's journey inspired you, please leave a like right now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this incredible journey, and activate the bell to follow every detail of the life of a man who became a legend. Cassius Clay returned from Rome an Olympic hero. The gold medal still shone on his chest, but its shine couldn't withstand the shock of reality. Arriving in Louisville, he believed his life would change forever, that he would finally be respected as a champion. But the first thing he encountered was an invisible blow. He was still barred from seating in any restaurant, still forced to enter through the back door in many places, still seen only as a black kid who won a fight. The gold he had won in Rome was worthless compared to the weight of racism in his own country. The humiliation was swift and brutal. One night, after trying to get service at a restaurant that refused to serve him, Cassius argued, felt the contempt in the manager's cold eyes, and left with the medal in his pocket. What he did next was forever etched in his memory. It is said that, in an act of rebellion, he threw the Olympic medal into the dark waters of the Ohio River. For many, it was a legend. For him, a silent cry of pain. Cassius understood that outside the ring, being a champion wasn't enough. He had to fight against something much greater, a system that wanted to keep him silent. This shock didn't knock him down. On the contrary, it strengthened him. Cassius returned to the gym and trained as if every punch were an answer. He ran through the streets of Louisville, shouting out loud, "I'm the greatest. I'm the most beautiful. No one can stop me." People laughed, but with each laugh, he grew more convinced. It was as if prejudice fueled his confidence even higher. He understood early on that he needed not only to win, but to attract attention, and he found in his own voice a weapon as powerful as his fists. It was during this period that his provocative style began to take shape. He would insult his opponents before fights, make precise predictions about which round he would win, and then deliver. This blend of spectacle and talent began to transform Cassius into a household name outside of Kentucky. He wasn't just a boxer, he was a ring performer, someone who turned every fight into a spectacle no one wanted to miss. At the same time, young Cassius found himself torn. On one side, the euphoria of being an amateur champion on his way to professionalism. On the other, the weight of exclusion and racial violence he witnessed daily. He began to understand that his voice spoke not only for himself, but for millions who had no space to shout. It was more than boxing. It was survival. It was identity. It was resistance. His first steps into professional boxing came quickly. With his unique style, he racked up victories with ease. The audience was mesmerized by the way he danced in the ring, by the way he provoked before, during, and after fights. He was impossible to ignore, but there were also those who hated him for his arrogance. "This kid needs to be shut up," critics and rivals said. And this tension only increased his strength. Because Cassius understood that hatred could also be fuel. Every punch he threw was a message. I exist. I will not bow down. I am the greatest. The boy who once had his bike stolen was now stealing the show, winning victories, and beginning to upset an entire country. His trajectory made it clear that he wouldn't just be a champion, he would be A symbol, and that's why I believe the real enemy isn't in the ring, but in silence. Cassius discovered early on that the greatest fight of his life would be against the invisible chains of prejudice, and he decided he would never fight in silence. How Cassius Clay, now undefeated in professional boxing, would approach a decision that would change his life forever, converting to Islam and choosing a new name, Muhammad Ali. The shout came before the applause. I shook the world. The arena in Miami shook when Sonny Liston didn't return for the 7th round. Cassius jumped the ropes, arms raised, eyes blazing. I said it. I said it. The young man no one took seriously had just knocked out the man who seemed invincible. Reporters pushed microphones, demanding explanations, asking him to thank luck. He didn't speak of luck. He spoke of destiny. Write it right. The new world champion is Cassius Clay, and you'll still learn to say my real name. In the locker room, as the ice burned his shoulders and sweat poured down, he looked in the mirror and repeated, as if sealing a pact, I'm not just a champion, I'm the message. Because there, more than a belt, a face was born for the courage to be whole. The seed for this moment had been planted long before, in discreet visits to the mosque, in long conversations with Malcolm X, in the silence of the early mornings when he discovered that a name could imprison or liberate. Your name is the story you accept to carry, Malcolm said firmly, looking inside himself. Cassius felt that Clay was the mark of a past he didn't choose. Between rounds of rope and prayers, he found a discipline deeper than training, that of recognizing himself. I want a name that doesn't deny me, he murmured to himself, as the city pushed him toward easy stereotypes. I want to be whole, in and out of the ring. Managers urged him to take it easy, to avoid controversy. Smile, fight, keep quiet, they suggested. He smiled, fought, and decided not to keep quiet. Fight week was a whirlwind. Liston glared like a predator, and Cassius responded with a dance of words and steps. I'll catch you in the wind, he teased, light on his feet, quick on the tongue. On Wednesday nerves were boiling, heartbeats racing, the press calling it a cheap show. In the first round, speed cut through the air. In the fourth, his eyes burned like fire. He shouted from the blind corner. Angelo Dundee pounded on his chest. Survive one more, boy. Run, run. Cassius spun around the ring like someone fleeing a fire, and when his vision returned, the plan reappeared with cruel clarity. Jabs like needles, body like music, mind like a blade. At the end of the sixth, Liston didn't get up. Shocked silence. Then the phrase that tore the world apart. I shook the world. It wasn't boasting, it was a warning. 2 days later, the public confirmation. My name is Muhammad Ali, Elijah Muhammad said, and the champion accepted. Headlines frowned. Sponsors closed their doors. Many insisted on calling him Clay, as if they could replace the cap on the bottle of destiny. At home, his mother asked softly, Son, are you sure? He held her hands. Mum, I always asked God to be true. Now I am. Malcolm smiled proudly, but the world shifted, and the distance between them grew as the movement's internal cracks surfaced. Muhammad felt the sting of this separation, but he didn't back down. If my faith changes me, let it change me completely. Children imitated his dance on the sidewalks. Men hated him for existing so loudly. Women wept in the front rows. And he carried on, fists in front of his face, his word before the country. Titled, Defenses followed, different cities, a crowd divided between boos and adoration. At each press conference he was reminded that belts weigh less than conscience. A government envelope arrived like a cold glove on his face. A summons. Silence. The champion read it slowly, breathed even slower. Friends said, sign and go. Others, fight and come back. He looked at his reflection and understood that this battle would have no neutral judges, no fair audience. There are wars that don't start with a bell, he said to Angelo. The coach lowered his eyes. Deep down, Ollie already knew what was coming. The price of saying no, exile, loneliness, the trial by fire of his new name. And I end this chapter looking at this crossroads and saying, courage without conscience is empty strength. Conscience with courage changes the world, I believe. The sergeant called the name. The line moved forward as one, except for one man who stood motionless, hands firmly at his sides. Muhammad Ali, they repeated. He took a deep breath and didn't take a step. The air grew heavy. An officer approached, beckoning him forward. My conscience doesn't allow it, he replied without raising his voice. There was nervous laughter, furious looks, a pencil noting refusal. Ali didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. Headlines calling him a coward. Politicians calling for exemplary punishment. Prosecutors sharpening laws. As he left the building, Flashbulbs blinded him more than any jab. Are you going to throw your career away? They shouted. He clutched the medal he no longer had, and even then he felt its old weight in his pocket. I lost a bicycle and found a way, he thought. I can lose belts and still keep my name. The storm came in waves. Belts were taken, licenses revoked, trials broadcast like bare-knuckle fights. On the phone, silence fell from those who once called to sell sponsorships. In the newspapers, columns sounded like verdicts. Give back the hero we invented, they demanded. In the empty gym, the echo of the ropes reminded him of a phantom audience. Angelo Dundee worried whispered, "Son, there are blows you don't see coming." Ollie nodded. The exile hurt, the bill to pay hurt, the bed that seemed bigger on sleepless nights hurt. His mother, teary-eyed, "Are you still my boy?" He held her hands. "I'm the same, Mom, only now I don't fight just for myself." And, in the mirror, he repeated the old refrain without an audience. I float, I spike, I resist. If the world closed doors on him, he trained his head not to close his heart. The speeches began at universities, churches, and street corners. Some booed, others stood, many wept. There he spoke without rancor, but with firmness. "I know what it's like to lose and still get up," he said, remembering the bicycle, Rome, Liston. Boys practiced their dancing steps on the cracked cement. Old men leaned their canes against him and smiled as they heard him promise to return. At home, bills piled up like long rounds. Friends disappeared, others appeared when the light went out. He ran in the early hours of the morning to escape the screams, and the sound of his sneakers on the asphalt said more than any speech. "I am alive." At the end of each run, fists raised to the sky, and when doubt grazed the back of his neck, he struck it with the same weapon as always, belief. "Who would I be if I said yes to what I don't believe in?" he asked the void, and the void responded with respectful silence. The years away from the ring taught a lesson no training camp could. The body loses rhythm. The mind, if exercised, finds new muscles. He memorized every old roar from the crowd and, so as not to forget the music, he tapped out combinations on the kitchen table. A return, it seemed distant, impossible, absurd. Still, he kept the key to his own future in the only drawer no one could open, the drawer of conviction. The man who danced lightly now stepped heavily, but he didn't drag chains. The world could call him whatever it wanted. The name that mattered was what he said when he closed his eyes. "I am Muhammad Ali," he reminded, like someone lighting a house in the dark, and, in the silence before the next bell, he sealed a pact, better to lose whole than to win empty. "I believe." From the bicycle to Rome, from Rome to Liston, from Liston to the refusal to face power, the origin of the myth wasn't a well-aimed punch. It was the daily decision to keep our spines straight when it would have been easier to bow our heads. The boy who ran crying after a bicycle learned that there are losses that rob us, and there are losses that reveal us. When gold weighed less than our conscience, he chose to sustain what cannot be seen, our name, our faith, the courage to disagree. And it is this path that remains for us. Not every triumph shines on the neck. Many shine in the darkness of our chests. May our voices not be sold, may our steps not be broken, may our victory begin within, because great is not he who wins early. Great is he who remains true to the end, I believe.